Have you ever wanted a shortcut learning something that seemed massive? I mean, think about AI, for example. You probably started like a lot of people just using ChatGPT, but now there's all these other products like Perplexity, Claude, Grok, and so many other things, plus the one we're going to talk about today. And so at a certain point, I had the same question. Like, I knew I needed to be paying attention to some of this other stuff, but I didn't know where to begin understanding which I would use where, or whether or not one would replace another, and so on. And then I discovered NotebookLM, and NotebookLM is the tool that I use, that I'm going to show you how I used it in a little different use case, in order to take massive amounts of information, lots of sources, and distill it down to, a process where I can kind of download and learn anything I need to very quickly. So by the end of this video, for example, you're going to learn how to set up NotebookLM to act as a junior accountant. Quick context for anybody who's new to this, NotebookLM is Google's research tool, which, as I already mentioned, is grounded in only the sources you provided. So you create a new notebook, feed it the sources that you trust, and then let it process the information, and you query it the same way you would ChatGPT or Claude or any of those others. But again, it's only relying on the sources you've given it. It's not going out onto the internet, so it's not likely to hallucinate. And like Perplexity, it cites every answer it gives based on which source it pulled its answer from, but again, it's only referencing your sources, whereas Perplexity, by contrast, is referencing sources it finds on the internet. Now, before you start a notebook, you're going to want to start with two documents, and this is something that I came up with based on working with it, a lot of iteration and kind of figuring out from just the sort of sweat of having to reprompt and reprovide lots of information over and over again. And so what I'm about to show you and explain is something I now use with just about every AI tool that I ever use. And it's based on, in this case, two documents, which will make sense in a second. One is going to be your own company profile. So you'll want a document that goes into detail explaining everything about your company that one would need to know. Assuming you were hiring a junior accountant, this would be the document you would want to give them on their first day to just review and get a really good and thorough and deep understanding of what they need to know in order to work for a firm like yours. The second document is sort of comparably the profile for the client. So in today's video, we're doing the example of Aphrodite Incorporated, which, as it says here, is a high-growth direct-to-consumer skincare wellness brand. They specialize in clean beauty products, primarily sold through their Shopify store and a burgeoning wholesale channel distributing to boutique spas, right? And of course, it goes on from here. Now, this is a document I took a lot of time, as you can see, to develop, right? And don't kid yourself, I used AI to help me in the development of both of these documents. I started out with something very rough and then used AI to refine it and kind of evolve it to include all the stuff it would need to include. So these two documents are going to travel with us into the notebook for sure that we create for Aphrodite Inc. And as you'll see also elsewhere, when we eventually query Perplexity to help us pull in some research, we're going to attach the Aphrodite Inc. profile. We don't need the firm profile for that. So we'll get there. But bottom line, the first thing you should be thinking about doing, if you haven't done anything like this yet, is creating a template for these kind of documents, and then creating these kind of documents every time you need to in order to work with AI on any level and in any platform. Now, you'll also hear me stress that you should do this with Google Docs for one simple reason, because with Google Docs, it's very easy to have a single source of truth in the form of these documents where I can update that, and then I can sync up the updates to whichever tool or whichever chat I may have attached them to. If you separately upload a Word document to each one of these, now you have to go through every single one and upload like the updated version. So that's a mess. I highly, highly recommend doing it this way. And just so you can see exactly what I'm talking about, here I am in the notebook that I created as I was doing the write-up. Here's the Aphrodite Inc. profile. I can click on this and click right here to sync with Google Drive. So clicking this will cause it to pull in any updates or changes that I've made to the document, right? Much harder to do if I have to separately attach a file every single time I've used it in every notebook and with every chat or LLM or whatever. Okay, so here's where it gets fun. I'm going to create a new notebook here, okay? And initially it prompts me right away for the sources, but I want to go name the notebook first. NotebookLM will name it for you, and obviously you can click in here and rename it, but I just want to be clear so I know, because I've got a few versions of this, right? So Aphrodite Inc., and I'll just put video copy. Obviously you won't need to do this but I need that so I know which one is the one we're working with today. Okay, so now we can go back to add sources. Now I've got 9 sources to start with that I want to add. Some of these might seem oddly specific, but that's kind of the point. And like I said, I've worked with AI in developing the process that you're about to see, and I've refined it and refined it and refined it to where now I've got the whole process nailed down, and that is what I'm sharing with you today. Okay, now bottom line, this notebook is about to become our junior accountant who's going to work with us on Aphrodite Inc. and analyze information at much greater speeds than we ever could, and distill things down and find things we wouldn't necessarily see nearly as easily. So I'm going to add these sources in. As you can see, you can just drop your files in here. I can upload them. I can select websites, right? And notice from the icon, I can also include YouTube URLs there. I can add from Drive or copied text, or just drag and drop files here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop in the tax return. Okay, I'll add sources again. Source 2 is going to be a Google Sheet, which we'll want to add in from Drive. So those don't drag and drop. So first I'll open it, and you'll see why in just a second. Okay, and now I'll go here to Drive, and what opening it did was it made it one of the recent ones. All right, so we'll add that in. I'll close that. Source 3 is going to be this wholesale expansion memo, which I'll explain more about later what that is and why it matters. Okay, for source 4, we're going to add a document we're calling the operations capacity snapshot. Again, I'll explain more about what all these mean. Source 5, let's close that. And I've got my folders open so that I have these at close reach, of course. Source 5 is a strategy call that we did, a transcript. You know how you get on Zoom and you have 8 million different AI bots that now have to join the Zoom with you, and you have to let them all in so that they can get their transcripts for each of the persons who's attending. So what I did was I took an example of one of these call transcripts based on a strategy call we did, and I want to include that as a source so that the AI can help me analyze what we discussed on that call and what information we need to know based on that. Okay. Next, I'm opening up source 6, which is another Google Sheet, so that I can get it added very quickly from Drive. Okay, the fixed asset summary. Okay, source 7 is a Shopify payout timing kind of analysis, right, that shows the sales and just shows basic information. Again, it's information I want my junior accountant to have while it's analyzing this stuff. So again, you open up the document in Google Sheets so that it becomes a recent document, and then you add the source via recent Google Docs. Okay, 2 more. The inventory aging sheet will come over here. 1 more. We have a credit card cash flow sheet here that explains some of the credit card expenses month over month that we want our junior. So basically, you think of it like this. Your junior accountant just started with you. You've assigned them to work on this client, and you're providing them with all the reports and research and everything they need in order to do the analysis that you want them to do on this company. So let's go in and add the 9th source and let it do its thing. And now I can close these up. And the good news is, as you saw earlier, I can click on each of these and pop it open right from within here. These are just links to where they sort of live. Okay, now we just wait for NotebookLM to process all the sources in case it's not done. As you can see, it's done. And then one of the first things I always like to do here is I'll click Audio Overview, and then I'll click Video Overview. Over here, it's going to prompt me for a bunch of settings and things I can change. For now, I'm just going to generate it. We can go back later if we want and get into the settings, and you can be more specific. You can even write, if you notice there was a prompt box at the bottom, I'll show it to you. You can do it on the audio too. So you can write up a prompt explaining more specifically what you want. But the first thing I want to do is have it just analyze everything and give me the high level drill down. Then I can go back and run a different audio overview with a specific focus on anything that I want to kind of dive deeper into. So now I want to give my junior accountant a very specific prompt. It's called a source gap prompt. So what we're kind of looking to do here is, and remember the context, we've just added all our sources. We're just beginning to process this information. And the first thing I want to do often, and this is a good kind of standard operating procedure when working with a tool like this, is I want to query it for the gaps, right? In other words, before we dive too deep into what is here, help me see what might not be here that needs to be. It's called a source gap prompt, okay? And I'm going to copy and paste this from my notes. All right, and this is where NotebookLM works just like ChatGPT or any other AI that you might already have worked with, right? Is I just write, or in this case, copy and paste the prompt. So we're going to say, review these financial statements and identify the 2026 market realities the client has ignored. Point out where the source A, the tax return, disagrees with source B, the internal ledger, using direct quotes. Finally, suggest 5 precise follow-up research questions to close these data gaps. Okay, so we're looking for gaps in the data. That's the prompt. Okay, so let's look at what NotebookLM produced. You can tell this is very fast, right? It queries it very quickly, goes through the data, and based on this simple prompt, here's what we've got. So if you're still downloading, coding, and reconciling bank statements and not making a plan to evolve into something that's more based on something like this, pay attention, because that's going away. I can guarantee you it's just a matter of time before that stuff gets completely automated. What AI can't replace, what it can never replace, is you sitting down and having a conversation with Elena, the CEO of Aphrodite Inc., and saying, look at this information we found, and here's our plan for what we need to do about it. That is what your members are paying for, not bank recs. And NotebookLM just did the heavy lifting in minutes, not hours, but just minutes. Okay, now we're going to take things to another level by bringing Perplexity into the mix, because Perplexity is the research agent, right? Perplexity is great at research. That is its superpower. So I went into Perplexity ahead of time and prepared a little project. They call it Spaces, right? And the first thing I want to do is attach the Aphrodite Inc. profile. And I don't know if I've properly connected my Google Drive account. Let's find out. There it is. So a quick search. Found it, Aphrodite Inc. profile. I just want to attach that so it has the context for the prompt I'm about to give it. And here's the prompt I'm going to paste in. So what we're looking for here is for Perplexity to read this prompt, read the document so it understands the client we're doing this for, and we want it to find sources based on research that we want to be able to do, that we want to actually add the sources into NotebookLM so that it can quickly process all that information. And I'll read the prompt and you'll understand what I'm talking about, what we're trying to accomplish here. So I have a client that's an e-commerce DTC beauty brand based in Arizona with a 3PL, that's the fulfillment company, in Texas, and sales tax nexus in 12 states. They sell on Shopify, send product samples to influencers, sell gift cards, and are planning a wholesale expansion. Find me the most relevant U.S. tax and regulatory source documents I should be grounding my research in for this client, right? So there's that word grounding. That's what we're kind of asking. Perplexity doesn't know, nor does it care that we're doing this for NotebookLM, but the grounding word is key because we're trying to tell it we want like reliable sources to ground our research in so that we can do the research, right? So let's send this prompt off and see what Perplexity comes up with. And then of course I did this also ahead of time, so in the interest of time I'm going to skip to at least the version of what I got from this the last time I did it. It should be similar, if not the same. Right, and so it comes in and sure enough it starts pulling in the research, and like I said earlier, it cites its references based on what it found on the internet. It's also indicating here that it looked at my document, my Aphrodite Inc. profile, right? Okay, and we could go on, and normally I would go on. In fact, the next thing I would normally do is prompt it and say, hey, can you give me all your sources in a table with the URL in its own column, so that I would get something like this, right? I could attach this document to NotebookLM, but you don't want to do that. In this case, what we want to do is just take all of these sources. The other thing I did that you should also do is I took the time to vet the sources, right? So again, the whole idea of NotebookLM is that I can ground it in sources I trust. So I don't necessarily want sources based on some random blog where somebody expressed their opinion that could be totally wrong, I'm using Arizona Department of Revenue, right? And a few other things that I looked at and satisfied myself that they were legit. If I'm being completely honest, there's probably some sources in here that in a real life situation I probably wouldn't include. But most of these you can see from the domains are sources that I think any one of us would agree can be trusted. Okay, so now I go back here. I've got the list of URLs copied, and also be careful about duplicates because sometimes it'll reference the same source for two different results. Right, so again, there's going to be some cleanup required, let's just call it. Let me get rid of some of these extra tabs. And now we're going to go to add these sources, websites, and paste the links in. Don't worry about how it looks. It doesn't need to look pretty. It just needs to work. Okay, and now it's adding in all these sources. And wait for them to process. Wait for all the circles to stop. Sometimes you will get errors, especially if something is behind a paywall. Right, so Perplexity might have found the source, but Perplexity didn't consider, and doesn't consider necessarily that it's behind a paywall. So you want to make sure that everything processes completely, and you'll see anything that doesn't kind of work will light up in red. So basically one prompt, and I got Perplexity to pull in a bunch of resources, another prompt or two, and I had it distilled down to a table so that I had the URLs that I could just copy and paste right into my research assistant here, my junior accountant, based on NotebookLM. All right, and here are the ones that came up with errors, right? Unfortunately, Arizona Department of Revenue. You can click here to see what the issue is. It says invalid URL. Normally, I would take the time actually and click over on these and try and figure it out and maybe find like the right URL. Could be any number of reasons, but for now and for today's purpose and in the interest of time, I'm not going to. I'll show you another thing you can do actually. So I take back what I said partially. So let's say I wanted to, I really want this source, right? Because it's very relevant. So let's go here to out-of-state sellers, okay? Yeah, let me just check something here. Okay, so let's say I really want this, but for some reason, obviously, it doesn't like this link. Okay, I can delete these. I'll just remove all failed sources, right? Then it's simple. I go onto the website. I use my browser's print function and just print it to a PDF. Okay. And over here, out-of-state sellers, Arizona Department of Revenue. And then I go back to my notebook. There it is. All right, got that open on my other screen. Add sources. And drag and drop that in. Okay, so now the next prompt, now that we have all that research here. All right, using IRS enforcement and 1099-K context in the uploaded sources, identify the top 5 audit risk areas for Aphrodite and propose specific controls for each. Boom. Our audio overview is ready, by the way. Again, I'll include that in the write-up so that you can access it and listen to it yourself. These things tend to be like around 20 minutes. Of course, what we're looking for here as part of our learning process today is how it matches up the research with the Aphrodite Inc. financial specifically, right? So the IRS has implemented stricter reporting rules, lowering the Form 1099-K issuance threshold for payment processors like Shopify, PayPal, and Stripe to $5,000 for 2024, with its plans to drop it to $600 by 2025. Because Aphrodite Inc. processes almost $2 million in Shopify sales, these payment facilitators will report gross transaction volumes directly to the IRS. The IRS uses automated matching, right? Given that Aphrodite already suffers from $156,400 discrepancy between its ledger and its tax return, any mismatch between the 1099-K reports and tax return will likely trigger an immediate IRS audit or backup withholding. All right, one more prompt. All right, and then we'll kind of wrap up here. Okay, so this refers back to some of the other sources we uploaded in the beginning that I sort of said I would explain and sort of have. By now, I think you understand, hopefully, the context and why it's important to provide as much detail as possible so that when doing an analysis like this, it's the same as if you had a junior accountant working for you and you didn't provide them enough information, that would impact the results you got. So the more detailed, the better information you provide, the better results you're going to get. Okay? So this prompt says, leverage all uploaded SOPs and tax references to build a month-end tax compliance checklist for the junior accountant that covers sales tax reconciliation, nexus review, 3PL inventory changes, gift card liability, and Amex receipt compliance. Boom, let's see what it does. And boom, here it is. So some of the same stuff it referenced above from the previous prompt, but now we've asked it specifically for a checklist, and it's given it to us. And here's another really cool feature of NotebookLM. Let's say I look at this and I'm like, okay, this is awesome, but I definitely need to get back to it later. And later might mean, you know, another 33 prompts. So I'm going to click here, Save to Note, and that's going to save it here. And interestingly, while we're there, if you wanted to, you could actually have this convert that to a source. So it would effectively add it right back here. Right now, I don't know why you'd want to do that necessarily, because obviously all this came from that information, but it may be that this concentrates the information into a single source that you're thinking is going to be valuable in other prompts or using any of these items from the studio. Let's hit the infographic one. I always like to do the infographic. Now, I came into the end of last year thinking in terms of, all right, you know, I've done so much with AI, just as many of us have really just probably kind of scratched the surface with it. And as I said in the beginning, I'm kind of wondering, okay, so where do I start and how do I begin to know where to start? And, you know, when I looked online at what other people in our industry have been sharing, a lot of it was like a lot of high level, like really long checklists of 8 million different products to look at. And I'm like, I don't have time to look at all that, right? I need a way to quickly distill it down and figure out what to focus on. I needed like a flashlight to point at something. I needed somebody to point a flashlight for my sake onto the things that I needed to pay attention to. And when I started playing with NotebookLM, I quickly figured out that NotebookLM was that tool. You saw the example here of how to set up NotebookLM to work as a junior accountant, because that's what I think would be most useful to you to start with right away. But another way that I used it was to use NotebookLM to learn how to use NotebookLM. Very meta, I know, right? But here's a notebook called NotebookLM Use Cases, right? Where I compiled a whole bunch of research from different articles and other sources that I said these look like useful sources on how to use NotebookLM. And so I distilled it down. I've got some infographics. I've got a brief here. I've got a note that I saved, right? So everything's here. And this is how I learned a lot very quickly, by taking all these sources. And instead of having to spend hours going through all the 10 and 12 different YouTube videos and all these articles, I just added it here, and then NotebookLM was able to summarize it for me in a way that helped me understand where to start and where to go deeper. So NotebookLM made this all very manageable. And another thing that I did with NotebookLM was I used it to compile research that I used Perplexity to get on all the different LLMs. I wanted to understand between Claude and Perplexity and ChatGPT and Grok and Gemini, what were the strengths and weaknesses of each? Why might I use one or the other, or should I just stick with ChatGPT? This was kind of the overarching question I was working from. And NotebookLM made this all very manageable. I did the research, wrote a whole article on it that you can also access in my Nerds Words area. And it's the reason, ultimately, that I'm now using Claude daily, part of the reason. Ultimately, I kind of landed on Claude as a result of this research to start with, but also a sequence of events that I've also already written about in my community. So if you want to learn all this, if you want to hang out with me and stick with me and understand what I'm doing and why I'm doing and how I've used all these tools to distill the research down to everything I need to know, and so I can do the work and then hand it off to you and save you the time and trouble and effort, join me. Now here's what I think you should do next in terms of today's exercise. Start with one notebook. Create a notebook for your own firm. Start loading it up with research. Work with whatever LLM you prefer right now. It could be ChatGPT, doesn't matter, but build that company profile for your firm. Build the firm profile. Ask it what you need to include on a document like that. Ask AI to ask you the questions that it needs. Let it help you compile the document. I will provide sample templates in the write-up. So again, if you click over and access the write-up in my community, you'll be able to download those, and you can start with those and feed it to your LLM and say, this is a sample company profile. I want to build one for my own firm. Help me fill in the blanks with whatever information we need. So pretty much everything I've shown you today is available in the companion article. So again, if you're watching on YouTube, just check the description for the link, click over, create your account if you need to, and you'll be able to access this and download all the resources. I'm going to include this infographic, which it just generated, and you saw how quick that was because you saw me click it like minutes ago, right? But this is cool. Just at a glance, you can see how nice this is. And again, this is Google, so it's using Gemini and it's using Nano Banana to produce its images. Here's the video, which again, I'm not going to sit here and have you watch me watch a video, but I will provide it in the write-up for this. Okay. And then the audio, for those of you who don't know this, is basically a podcast style playback. There'll be two AI voices kind of kicking the research around and having a discussion about it. It's my favorite piece of, it's my favorite part of NotebookLM. It's my favorite thing to do. And the first thing I do when I load a notebook up with sources, as soon as that audio is ready, more so than the video, I love to listen to the audio. I don't have time to listen to podcasts, but these I love to listen to. That's how much I can't stress enough how much I think everybody should be using this and using this particular feature. And then, like I said, once I've started to analyze the research and prompt and learn a little bit more and go deep in certain areas, then go back and run a new one, but this time prompt it. Give it some information about what format you'd like. Note some of the other options. You can, the default is a deep dive, but you can do a brief one. I like the critique. Right, and then this would be a really fun one, is the debate, where you just have the two AI voices debating each other on the subject and kind of arguing about it, right? So lots of cool little features here to play with and figure out what you like best. Now, like I said a few times, if you're not in Talk Nerdy to Me yet, it's free to join. Just join it. You'll get access to all the resources totally free for any article like this one and video like this one that I produce. The difference between that and YouTube, of course, is you have the write-up and the downloads and everything else that I can't provide you in the description in a YouTube video. Now, if you're not in Talk Nerdy to Me yet, I've mentioned it a few times. All you have to do if you're watching this on YouTube is go into the description and click the link to watch this and get access to all the related resources in Talk Nerdy to Me. If you're not already a member, it takes a second to create an account. You just need your name and email, and then you can access everything here. And this is where everything I do lives, and you'll have immediate access to anything I do long before it lands on YouTube or anywhere else on the internet. In other words, this is where all my resources live. Courses, articles, videos, everything I do starts out here and then gets out to the rest of the web, sometimes as much as a full week later. And finally, if you like what you see here, then please subscribe. Please click the little bell so you get all the updates every time I upload something new. And post your comments. Let me know what you like. Let me know your takeaways. And like I said earlier, the thing I would love most to hear from you about is what your experience and takeaways are once you've actually tried using NotebookLM for your own firm.